What would drive a father to collect his own baby's urine to cheat a drug test? In 2020, Mike Tyson casually dropped this bombshell on his Hot Boxin' podcast, describing it as if he were sharing a recipe for protein shake. "It was awesome, man," he said, his trademark lisp wrapping around words that should have made any parent cringe. But in the world of professional boxing, where millions of dollars hang on the results of a simple cup of urine, even the most sacred boundaries can blur. The story starts not with the punch-drunk glory of heavyweight championships, but in the quiet moments between fights, where Iron Mike faced a different kind of opponent, the drug tester. At first, he used his wife's urine, a common enough trick in the world of professional sports. But pregnancy markers could show up in female urine, and Tyson wasn't about to let biology derail his deception. That's when he had what he considered a stroke of genius. Use his infant's urine instead. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere in the palatial Tyson estate, someone had to collect an infant's urine regularly enough to maintain this charade. This wasn't a one-time act of desperation. It was a system, a routine, a calculated exploitation of innocence that went on throughout his career. The same hands that knocked out opponents in the ring were handling baby bottles filled with something that wasn't milk. The casual nature of his admission perhaps speaks volumes about the moral compass of professional sports. In his 2013 autobiography, Undisputed Truth, Tyson laid out these details not as confessions of shame, but as tales of clever circumvention. The same way a general might proudly recount battlefield strategy, Tyson described how he acquired a prosthetic penis, known in the underground world of drug test deception as a Whizzinator, specifically colored to match his skin tone. The device itself became as much a part of his fighting equipment as his gloves or mouthguard. Custom made in brown to match his complexion, it was designed to fool the drug testing officials, who were required to directly observe the sample collection. Picture that scene: a boxing champion, standing before officials, performing what amounts to an intimate sleight of hand with his infant's bodily fluids as the prop. The scheme worked flawlessly until it didn't. In 2001, something went wrong with the deception, leading to a $200,000 fine for marijuana use. But that single failure only hints at the countless successful deceptions that came before it. Tyson openly admits to using cocaine and marijuana during his career, substances that would have shown up in his system had he provided his own samples. The world of professional sports has always been a dance between those who make the rules and those who find creative ways around them. But Tyson's scheme elevated this dance to an art form. The Whizzinator wasn't something you could just pick up at your local sporting goods store. It required connections, planning, and a network of people willing to look the other way. The underground market for these devices thrived in the shadows of professional sports, serving athletes desperate enough to risk everything to maintain their facade of cleanliness. Drug testing officials didn't just stand across the room, they were required to have a direct line of sight to watch the sample being produced. This meant Tyson's prosthetic needed to be convincing enough to fool someone standing mere feet away, watching intently. The device had to maintain the urine at body temperature, release it naturally, and appear completely authentic under close scrutiny. One small slip, one moment of hesitation, and millions of dollars would evaporate. The logistics of maintaining this deception were staggering. Fresh infant urine had to be collected and stored at the right temperature. The prosthetic needed regular maintenance and cleaning. Someone had to coordinate with Tyson's schedule, ensuring fresh samples were available whenever random drug testing might occur. This wasn't just one man beating the system, it was an entire operation running alongside his boxing career. Behind closed doors, a ritual would unfold before each test. Like a warrior donning armor, Tyson would prepare his Whizzinator, making sure everything was perfect. The temperature had to be just right. Too cold, and it would be obvious. Too hot, and it might raise suspicions. The volume had to be sufficient for testing, but not excessive. Every detail mattered because the stakes were astronomical. The boxing world of the 1990s and early 2000s was awash with money. A single championship fight could generate tens of millions of dollars. Sponsorships, pay-per-view revenues, and betting lines all hinged on a fighter's ability to step into the ring. A failed drug test wouldn't just cost a fighter their purse, It could destroy their entire career. In this context, the elaborate deception makes a twisted kind of sense. When millions are on the line, morality becomes surprisingly flexible. But here's where things get really interesting and darker. The officials tasked with maintaining the integrity of boxing weren't just failing to catch these deceptions. They were part of a system that seemed designed to look the other way. Think about it. Tyson's 2001 marijuana bust resulted in a mere $200,000 fine. For a man who earned $300 million during his career, that was pocket change, barely a slap on the wrist. It's like getting a parking ticket for robbing a bank. The boxing commissions of the 1990s and early 2000s operated in a strange twilight zone, where everyone knew what was happening. But nobody wanted to be the one to pull back the curtain. After all, a failed drug test for someone like Mike Tyson meant canceled fights, lost revenue, and a whole lot of angry people with financial stakes in the game. From promoters to cable networks, from betting houses to venue operators, an entire ecosystem depended on these fights happening as scheduled. When Tyson finally admitted to using cocaine and marijuana throughout his career, the response from the boxing world was telling. Mostly silence. No investigations were launched into past fights, no titles were stripped, no records were amended. It was as if the sport collectively shrugged and said, well, what did you expect? This wasn't just about one fighter beating the system. It was about a system designed to be beaten. The real kicker? Tyson wasn't alone in this game. His openness about the Wizinator scheme pulled back the curtain on what many suspect was, and possibly still is, a widespread practice. The same officials who watched Tyson provide his samples were watching other fighters too. The same testing protocols that failed to catch him were being used across the board. How many other champions, how many other title fights, how many other records were built on similar deceptions? Fast forward to 2024, and Tyson's preparing for a fight with Jake Paul in Texas, where he's required to abstain from marijuana, a requirement that made headlines precisely because it's so rare in modern boxing. The sport's relationship with drug testing remains complicated, a dance between appearance and reality, between what we know and what we're willing to acknowledge. The more things change, the more they stay the same. The most unsettling part of this whole story isn't the drug use, the sophisticated deception, or even the millions of dollars involved. It's the casual way Tyson talks about using his infant's urine, as if borrowing a cup of sugar from a neighbor. This isn't ancient history either. His 2020 podcast admission came with laughter, like sharing a clever hack rather than confessing to exploiting his own child. That's what happens when the abnormal becomes normal. The shocking becomes a punchline. Somewhere out there is a person who, as a baby, unknowingly became part of this scheme. Imagine discovering that your earliest contribution to your father's career wasn't attending his fights or wearing a cute Team Tyson onesie. It was providing clean urine samples to help him beat drug tests. It's the kind of revelation that makes you question everything about your childhood memories. Those quiet moments, those private family times, how many of them were interrupted by the needs of this deception? The ripple effects extend beyond just Tyson's family. Every time he tells this story, every time it makes headlines, it sends a message to current and future athletes. This is just part of the game. The normalization of exploitation becomes a blueprint for the next generation. After all, if one of boxing's biggest icons can laugh about it on a podcast, how bad could it really be? Professional sports has always operated in moral gray areas, but this crosses into territory that should make us deeply uncomfortable. We're not talking about performance-enhancing drugs or betting scandals. This is about turning an infant into an unwitting accomplice. The child couldn't consent, couldn't understand, couldn't refuse. In any other context, using a baby's bodily fluids for deception would be considered beyond the pale. But wrap it in the context of professional sports, add millions of dollars and championship belts, and suddenly we're all just nodding along. The most profound darkness here isn't in what happened, it's in our collective response to it. The story made headlines not because people were outraged, but because they were amused. It became another chapter in the wild saga of Mike Tyson, filed alongside face tattoos and ear-biting incidents. But unlike those other scandals, this one involved exploiting an innocent child who had no say in the matter. As we watch Tyson prepare for his 2024 fight with Jake Paul, as we hear him discuss Texas's marijuana testing requirements, it's worth remembering this isn't just about drug tests or boxing regulations. It's about what we're willing to accept, what we're ready to laugh off, and what that says about us as a society. The lasting darkness isn't just in what happened back then, it's in how we process it now.